Hello, everyone, and welcome to the podcast, a very special episode because I'm here with Pete and Gary. And I mean, believe it or not, I don't think I can believe it. 200 episodes coming up very, very soon, the 200th episode. I mean, this started as a bit of was it a COVID, lockdown, boredom,
No, it was pre-COVID.
It was pre-COVID, it was too. I think
Yeah.
COVID just gave us the opportunity to do more stuff. Anyway, chaps, welcome to the show, this celebration of 200 episodes. So I thought it'd be great just to get everyone together and just talk about the highs and the numerous lows and how far we've all come.
The downfalls.
The highs.
Well, we should cast our minds back. It was pre-COVID, you're right. We just had this idea that you guys had something to say and maybe some people would want to listen. And look, I think we've said this all along that I think we would have put this podcast together even if no one was listening, but it's handy that we have such a devout group of followers. But I'm going to start with you, Gary, because what did you think when Peter rang up and said, I've got this idea that we should record ourselves and put it out in the universe?
Well, if you remember rightly, originally it was Peter Hart's military history, because he was, I think, originally going to do it on his own, and he quite quickly recognised that he couldn't.
Get bored.
That he'd get very bored. So when we first started, I was really quite nervous about it. I spent about 2.5 hours doing research, and then Peter'd go off at a complete tangent and we do something else. So I was a bit worried about it to begin with, and I thought, it'll only last about 3 months, and then, we'll move on to something else.
I've got to say, we don't want to make this the sort of episode where we blow various sunshines up parts of each other's bodies, but yeah, that's it. But Gary, you've come such a long way. I've got to say,
it's
been a journey for him.
In my very first episode, you had to edit the first episode because I've come a long way since I uttered buggery within a minute and a half of the first episode.
And you've never done it since.
We have come a long way since then. I mean, it's a really good question. How has the show evolved from what you originally thought over a beer or a cup of coffee you were going to do? How has the show evolved over 200 episodes?
Pete?
I don't know. I thought we've moved to a sort of... We based a lot of them on my old books because we soon realised that we couldn't be bothered to do the work. and of course the books are done, you chop up the bits and make them into chapters. Gary works through it and sorts out the characters and points out my many mistakes, and that's part of what keeps us going. And it has been fun revisiting some of those old books, which I've completely forgotten about it in my usual way. And it all told, it's been a very pleasurable experience. There are ups and downs, as you know, many ups and even more downs, mainly connected with our foolishness. But, we keep on plugging away.
And on occasion, we've gone off on tangents. So, for example, the Waterloo episodes, which ended up being 3 episodes because we'd done so much, it just couldn't go into one. But we bought I bought about 300 quid's worth of books. I think Pete bought about 2 or 3 times as many, so that we could sort of get the background for the podcast, because neither of us were Waterloo experts, and so we spent an absolute fortune on books.
And it's been the start of something big because we've been to Waterloo 2 or 3 times now. And we love going there. We look at the wider battle. We look at the Prussians. We look at what's going on. We pay tribute to the Germans, and it's made it much. So the podcasts have led us into something great.
Well, that's the really important question. I'm just going to throw it out there. Why do you guys do it? 200 episodes is a long slog. A lot of people that started podcasts, at the same time, stopped after 20 or 30 episodes. Why do you do it? What keeps you coming back to the podcast?
Well, Pete has one of my children in captivity, and I have to keep doing that.
That wouldn't make you do anything. You just say, "I'm thinking of your children now." Hi, John, Jay.
I mean, to be fair, we certainly through lockdown, it got us through lockdown. We thoroughly enjoyed it. We did the majority on Zoom. because there was no choice. But otherwise, we'd have gone stir crazy.
Yeah.
Subsequently, we've discovered that actually we do quite like it, and now it's a lot easier now than it was, because I don't know if you can remember, Matt, you saying to us, "Oh, can you keep them to under an hour?" And we, being the talent, were saying we couldn't possibly do it in under an hour.
Possibly. I particularly said, "No, right on me high horse." You remember, Matt?
I recall.
It's impossible for us to get it under an hour and 10, I said. What's the average now? 40,
well, it's about
45,
minutes. 50 minutes. And we sort of do it at each other's house. Pete usually walks to mine.
Got to keep my figure.
Yeah. So, we can do 2 or 3 a week pretty easily without, disturbing our week too much.
Well, tell me about that process, how you put them together, because I think everyone would agree that it does sound effortless, but obviously there's a lot of effort that goes into it. I said effortless. No, but you do it with great ease. But obviously I know, I talk to you guys and I know there's a process behind it. So why don't you just share that with us, what actually goes into each episode?
Well, I normally start the process by taking the topic, and mostly I take some work I've already done. And then I edit it to make it into what I think will be a podcast. Then Gary edits that, puts it right. He adds colour, he adds charm, he adds grace, he adds wit, and he decides what's going to happen. And then we do it together, but we don't follow the script entirely. Gary often tells me off for being a bit Roger irrelevant, as we call it, and forgetting what I'm talking about or getting easily distracted. Even now I'm being distracted by what's going on around me here. Just looking at the neighbours.
One of the things that came out of it, for example, somebody pointed out to Pete that he kept saying, it was a Scotsman who pointed that out.
Bastard. He's one of our mates, but bastard. Every week.
Pete's now very careful about making sure that he can keep the subject moving. And if he can't, I'll jump in and, try and bring us back on track.
Give him a prod.
Occasionally, we are very respectful of the men and women that we're talking about. We are very respectful. Yeah. However, we do like it to sound as if it's just a couple of guys sitting in a pub having a talk about something that they're both interested in. So some of the lighter ones, such as the Laugh or Cry series, for example, we have fun and we go completely off piste, and we might come back or we might not, because we don't rehearse it, we don't practice it, we don't edit. We just record what we say, and on occasion we regret what we say. But there is it's not a script per se, but there's a story that we follow, and we try and keep to it.
Well, there's enough boring military history podcasts out there. No names will be mentioned, but there's enough dry ones. So I think this sort of adds a breath of fresh air.
I like that Battle Walks.
Oh, that's a good one. That's a good one. Thank you.
I like that. I like that Pete Smith, the good-looking bloke.
Well, what are some of those other podcasts that you guys must listen to podcasts as well as everyone else? What are some of those podcasts that you've that have inspired you?
Well, there we go. I don't.
We don't, frankly. We don't get the time. We do listen occasionally. I've had to listen to the James Holland one. Yeah. We've listened to a few of yours. Peter Reid, we've listened to.
Paul
Reid. No, I listen to Peter Reid. He's much better.
He's much better, isn't he?
But we generally don't have the time, because if we're not doing one of Peter's books, then we have to learn about it. So, for example, Islandwana, we both loved the episodes on Islandwana.
All my books there.
But we didn't know anything at all. So
even how to pronounce it, I imagine.
How do you pronounce it, Matt?
Isandlwana.
Oh, Has it got a T in it?
That was unscripted. I don't know how I did, but it's the bane of our existence, isn't it?
I'm the bane of our existence.
You're the Gary Bain of our existence. We actually thought about not doing that on our recent documentary filming, Pete, at the National Army Museum, simply because neither of us could pronounce it. But we soldiered on.
Not being able to pronounce it's not really worried us, is it?
Yeah, no. Exactly. Well, that's part of the story as well. I think that's what makes it an interesting podcast. You mentioned those series, Gary, that you guys have done. South Notts Hussars, Pete off the back of Foot Sloggers. I can't remember the names for all of them now. The whole tank series.
Burning Steel,
that's right. Laugh or Cry, which was one of my favourite. Is there a favourite series you've got amongst those ones that you've done, the regular episodes?
I've got a favourite episode, and we talked about this earlier, Pete and I. And my favourite episode is the one that we did, Heroes All, with Jim Grundy, because it was entirely different to stuff that we'd done previously.
Yeah.
And it was trying to demonstrate that everybody is human. So whatever you get in society, you get in the military. Everything that you get in society, and that we were trying to show that, and I think that came through. And we were in Gallipoli actually, I think, when that came out, and I listened to that, and I thought that was really powerful, and I thought Jim did a great job. And working with somebody else who was professional taught us such a lot. And actually, we've worked with a number of people because of that, but Jim was the first. We've subsequently worked with Nikolai and various others. But that was my favourite. Pete, yours?
Well, I've got two favourites, of course. So my first, and the one that I mentioned to you this afternoon, was I like the Durham Light Infantry ones. You might say that's because it's your latest book. I like it because it's just so visceral. It's just so up close. We recorded an episode today, and the fighting, the impact of the wounds, the horror, the loneliness of battle. I think it comes out great. There's no humour in it at all. No accents. Durham accents. No nothing. And the other one I liked was the exact reverse, and Gary mentioned it earlier. The laugh or got to get the name right. Laugh or Cry, which I thought was great fun, and I thought it was amusing. It showed the sort of inner tragedy. The cry bit did come out, but mostly it was the laughing for the podcast anyway. And I really enjoyed that. So those two series have been my favourite. And on its own, I like this and Wana episodes just because I can't say it. But do you know what? One thing we've discovered is we can't say. I think it's a project. A project. I can't say that. It's a part of the British education because you can write words down, and you know what they mean. You can't pronounce them. So Gary,
what you mean? Words like tower, which I kept saying tower.
I was one of them, but I can't say exigencies of service. There are lots of words, and then every French one, every French or we just can't. You think you can pronounce it, and then you think, how do you pronounce it? Because it's just written down normally to us, you know. So that was
got so much in common with Pete Smith, and he lives in France and can't pronounce the French names. It's
We were all right. We were all right today, Matt, because we were recording an episode where there was a village in Italy called Bastardo.
We could pronounce that.
We managed perfectly well.
Any of the ones that sound like swear words. That's fascinating.
Gary's been studying Spanish, which is very similar to Italian, and he was able to tell me what bastardo meant. What was it, Gary?
Bastard.
No. That was so helpful. So yeah, there we go.
You mentioned the Laugh or Cry series, and it's something that's a characteristic not just of that series, but of all your episodes, is the humour. You know, you guys are mates. As you said, it is like being in a pub. I will never forget laughing. I laughed so hard, and I replayed it about 10 times. The line in one of I think it was a South Notts Hussars episode, where someone said, "We're surrounded by Rommel and his panzers," and the reply was, "Who's Rommel and what's a panzer?" That line, I replayed that over and over. But I think
that was a chap called Hutton. I remember him.
I think for me, it gives a little window, though, not just into what's going on, but that's also a window into history. It's not just a funny line, but that is a great window into history in that early stage of the war, these things that would become so famous were completely unknown to the blokes who were wrapped up in the fighting. I love those little moments. I mean, is humour important in the flow of the podcast?
Yes and no. I think when
appropriate.
We've been influenced by others. We've been influenced by you, Matt, and by Paul Reed and his brother Pete, by Pete Smith. But unfortunately, we've also been influenced by Bloodknock and Dame Edna. And various others, and that sometimes seeps in. So one of the things that I laughed at, and sometimes, Matt, it's a good job we don't do video all the time. I am in hysterics, and one of them was when Colonel Scott, Robert Scott, which Pete seemed to do as a Cornish pirate.
He was
for
a
some reason.
Posh Norfolk colonel.
And I was in hysterics on the floor.
I'm telling you, there'll be trouble ahead. Those Japanese.
Not because Pete was particularly funny, but it was just the ridiculousness of two guys, telling a story about, in that case, the Norfolks, and an officer who sounded like a pirate, which just tickled me.
We have had complaints about that. You've had complaints about it, Matt. Why do they do accents? Well, the reason is we try and only do it when it's appropriate. We did slip once and somebody seized on it to castigate us. But normally, if it's something terrible is happening, we don't use accents. But they're fun. And Gary's Australian. This is stuff of legend.
I want to hear, Gary, give us a bit of the Australian.
You want to give you a bit of the Australian? Yeah, nah.
Crikey.
Crikey. We had when we do live things at the Western Front Association, we have a vote on who's got the best Australian accent, because we both do it. And Gary always wins. He's a master of it. He's a master. I think
Somebody pointed out to me once that it sounded more like a New Zealander, and I stupidly replied, "That's the same thing, isn't it?"
Bloody hell, those are fighting words, Cobber.
Yeah, exactly. Went down well.
Well, on that subject of getting feedback, what's the best feedback? And I use the word best in all of its context. What's the best feedback that you guys have received?
We were going to have it on our business card, but somebody said we were a pair of bitter, twisted wankers.
I just want to say, for the record, I often don't pass on feedback to you guys, because saying the same thing time and time again gets, probably repetitive. No, you get mostly very, very positive feedback, but I do enjoy those ones myself. I think if people are approaching this podcast, I think it's fairly clear what's written on the tin. It's clear from the introduction what they're going to get. The picture, the intro, I think it's fairly clear what people are going to get. So I'm still surprised when someone will do us the honour of listening to 48 minutes of a podcast and then go, I didn't like the way they were laughing.
Well, we had one recently that made Gary upset. Not upset, he thought it was funny. The bloke said that Gary should be left to do all the history and I should fuck off and become a comedian. Which I thought was fairly good.
And I took offence at him suggesting I was a historian.
And not funny.
Gary's both.
You mentioned earlier that you did, when the Waterloo episodes, that you approached them, originally with very little knowledge and then developed it for the podcast. We haven't discussed this question, so I'm going to put you on the spot. But what has surprised you the most? Is there a subject that when you approached it was completely different to what you expected, or as you did the research, you discovered it was different? What's the biggest surprise been during the last 200 episodes?
Well, for me, it was Hague. We did a series on Hague, which we still haven't finished. We still got to do the 1918 episode and the post-war. We're saving it for our devoted listeners. But the episode on the Sudan, remember, Gary, it triggered a real interest for me. And I got a book contract for a load of money. And that's my main interest in life at the moment, the fighting in the Sudan. Not particularly Hague, just the Sudan. I knew nothing about it, it turned out. And I'm trying to tell the story through the Great War veterans who were there, which is a lot of them, anything above colonel. And that, for me, was the subject. It was just so much more interesting than I ever thought it would be. Gary, what did you...
Well, if you don't mind, I'm going to talk about Hougoumont. And Pete found it difficult. And actually, it's the only time we ever had a row. And
it's a good...
we turned the machines off. But Pete found it really difficult. But actually, if you listen to the episode, I think it's one of our best episodes. And yet Pete struggled with that.
I did.
Once he started it, he was fine. He just got it into his head that it was going to be difficult.
I don't know why.
Like a recalcitrant child.
So, I took it out on Gary.
But I listened to that episode. That was great.
It was a good episode.
Your accounts of Waterloo. I'm very heavily into Waterloo at the moment, but your accounts of Waterloo on the podcast are what really got me interested in it. It wasn't a subject that really appealed to me before.
That's brilliant.
So I think, I think that's. I don't think I'm the only one that would say that. Is that it is? I think approachable is the word. You do make it. Putting aside joking around, you make these topics approachable. There's a lot of human interest in it. There's a lot of quotes from soldiers. I mean, harrowing at times. When I'm listening to those episodes, when we're doing the edit, some of them are just absolutely harrowing. But I mean, it's a very human thing that you bring.
Hang on, edit.
Making your voice sound much nicer than it is, not like the squeaky version we're listening to now. No, but it's a very human element you bring to the podcast. I think that's really important.
Yeah, the Burning Steel series I found at times horrific, and I was reading quotes and thinking, bloody hell, we carry on, but it's probably a good job in some cases that the next speaker is Pete after you've read something, about some of the...
That's the only episode that you guys did. One of them, I can't remember which one, that I turned off midway through because I just went, no, I'm not in the place to...
some of it is horrific, mate. Some of it really is horrific. Yeah.
It is.
Pete, on that subject, Pete, you had the privilege of speaking to a lot of the people you're now referring to in the podcast. That's why we know what they had to say. How's that evolution been now that these people are long gone? What does it mean to you that you got the privilege of speaking to them and their words are still carrying on through the podcast?
What's fantastic for me is today, Gary, remember I was talking about his name's Douglas Tiffin, and he was terribly, terribly wounded. He was abandoned for 18 hours on the battlefield, and he was lying there, and he was talking, and I was doing the voice. No accents, no nothing. And as I was speaking, I mean, Gary looked quite strange to me. He often looks quite strange to me. But he was opposite me, and I realised it must be like when I was listening to Tiffin himself. And I remembered how I felt just listening to this bloke telling this incredible emotive story. And for me, it's brought back to life a lot of those people. All the DLI are dead. All but one of the Burning Steel people are dead. All the South Notts are dead. I'm like the grim fucking Reaper. Oops, sorry about that. Sorry, listeners. But
except we had to
Gary's
give people different surnames. In fact, we called them all Z. So you had Dan Z and various other people for some of the people that are still alive. Because we thought,
well, because people are the
they were
same
in
age.
Iraq.
Yeah, and you can imagine you wouldn't want to be in the barracks because some of them are regulars. Dan Z is a regular. You can imagine being in the barracks and say, I've just heard this podcast. I hear that you shat yourself 14 times, when you got diarrhea and vomiting. And we thought, no, we're not. So we gave them letters, Dan Z, Adrian P. I didn't do a very good job of it. A Dan Z and an Adam Z. We wondered whether they were brothers.
I don't want to focus too much on just the oral history side of it, but Pete, I'm writing a Gallipoli book at the moment, and you've kindly lent me several books, and I'm listening to, of course, the famous Joe Murray series of interviews, which must be Potentially, I don't want to rank them, but might potentially be your most famous series of interviews.
Yes,
but it's fascinating because I know you to hear your voice on that tape as well, to hear a much younger Peter Hart asking insightful questions and basically engaged in a conversation with a Gallipoli veteran. You know, something that I would have given a lot to have 10 minutes with a Gallipoli veteran, and you got so many hours with him.
Well, it's 21 hours, isn't it? That one.
Yeah, it's incredible. And
he was
you can hear it for free. If you're listening to this as well and you want to check it out, it's available for free on the IWM website, the Imperial War Museum.
If you type in Joe Murray and Imperial War Museum, you'll get it.
It comes straight up. But it struck me, Pete, hearing your voice. I don't want this to sound too arty-farty, but hearing your voice, there was obviously a time travel element in there. That I was back in that lounge room in Joe's house, hearing you speak to him in the 80s. I assume it was
84.
I mean, that's a hell of a legacy you've got of all of these amazing experiences that you kept, and not just kept in a diary or a letter or something that's quite passive for us to look at, but we can hear those voices. We can hear that emotion in their voices. How do you look back on all that now?
I'm very grateful to the War Museum that gave me the chance. And, I want to make it clear, it's not just them. The veterans, like some of the other great veterans I've done, are my age now. The last 3 veterans I've done were 68, the same age as I am. I interviewed Gary. You've heard the story of how I interviewed Gary. I met him and I couldn't understand how the army had missed his potential. Because Gary, as you may know, was, what were you? I always get it wrong, so you tell me what you were.
I was the head of commercial at TfL.
Transport for London. And in the army, he was a corporal, busted to private 17 times. And I wanted to interview him, and did, after I first met him, just because I thought the army had missed this man's potential. This man's bloody genius. Anyway, I interviewed him. I think I did 3.5 hours with him, and he was a complete and utter knob. The army did entirely the right thing. He was a drunken bum of the highest order, and it was only after he left the army he became the highly intelligent and coherent being you see before you.
I think we should refer to this person now on with a pseudonym. It's Gary B. We're referring to
Gary Z.
Gary Z.
I once interviewed this guy, Gary Z.
Yeah,
Gary Z. That's right.
How do you find those personal accounts, Gary? Because when I listen to it, I think that Pete's somewhat insulated from it, from having done it for 40 years. I hear a lot more emotion in your voice sometimes when you're reading these accounts. How do you find, reading the words of the men that went through all this?
I'll go back to something you said earlier, Matt, that when I was about 15 years old, my father finally allowed me to go to the pub with him on a Sunday. 50. And he would go to the pub, and I'd sit at the table with him, and there would be 3 Great War veterans that he would play cribbage with, which is a card game. And they'd have 2 or 3 pints, and then after 2 or 3 pints, they'd start singing Great War songs. And I never asked them a single thing about anything. And then I went in the army at 16, so, I disappeared. And sometimes when I'm reading these things, I actually see those 3 guys in my mind's eye, particularly when, some of the experiences are, shall we say, more harrowing than others, and you just read about things. And the laugh and cry stuff, the normality of life in a trench, going to the latrine. And I just see these guys in the back of my mind and think, why didn't I ask them about going to the toilet in the trench? But you don't say a thing. So for me, Pete points out when I'm getting a bit tired and emotional reading these things out, but it's usually because I've got a frog in my throat and I'm not stuttering over it at all. But I just get this image in my head of these guys living life in those circumstances. Even things like, the guys getting plum and apple jam all the time, and bully beef, and I can see it. So it's not because Pete's brilliant at producing the notes; it's their words, and often it's that they're brilliant in conveying the message that they're trying to get across. And sometimes the message is just, it's shit. And other times the message is, the camaraderie, and other times the message is, missing home. There was the interview you did with the chap where you turned the machine off, Pete, when he got upset.
Yeah.
Because he was singing a song about home that he presumably sang when he was, in Gallipoli all those years before.
That was Horwich and Homelands.
Yeah.
But I mean, I endorse everything Gary says, but and he knows, and I know, and you know, Matt, that actually soldiers don't change. So fundamentally, those lads in the trenches have very similar lives and experiences and sense and camaraderie and attitudes to the lads who were in Iraq and Afghanistan. Human nature doesn't. People think it does change. I don't think it does. I mean, there are changes, but I think essentially things like camaraderie, comradeship, or other, if you want, and just reaction to boredom and relationship with alcohol. The British soldier has an entertaining relationship with alcohol. It's changed a bit recently, but it's still there, and all that kind of stuff. And so when I'm doing modern interviews, and sometimes I remember interviewing a 19-year-old, and I was 64, and I sort of reversed what it was when I started. Great. I was very lucky to get that job, and thank you to the War Museum that gave me the chance.
Well, thank you, Pete, for the hard work that you did and the incredible stories you brought out of those people. It wouldn't have come out without the right person asking the question. So it's a brilliant resource. We're nearing the end of the current series. Sad to say, but let's talk about the future. What have we got coming up? Because we were just talking about this, about future series. What's on the horizon for Pete and Gary's military history?
Gary wants you to bring in more of these video things so we can have more nakedness. That was the thing that Gary pressed.
I don't think I've ever once seen a feedback form that said these guys would be great if they just got their tits out. So we might not do that one. But
all right. What else have we got, Gary? What were you planning?
It wasn't our tits that we were thinking of.
It's all right. We've already dropped the F-bomb, so now a lot of the listeners that would be offended now have already tuned out. So you can pretty much say what you like now.
Oh,
well, I think in the immediate instance, we've got a new book coming out. Well, it's supposed to be July, but I think it may well be sooner, the way that they've started to progress things. And that's called Laugh or Fly.
That's brilliant. That's like laugh or cry, but a different word, Gary.
Exactly. And it's about the Royal Flying Corps. And so we're going to do a series on that, but probably not what's going to be in the book. It's going to be all the stuff that didn't make it to the book. But it's slightly different in the sense that it's not very funny when you're up in the air, and the humour is when you get down, and the relief when you get back to the ground, and they really let themselves go then. And so we sort of do a mixture of the action and the laughter, for want of a better word. And then I think, what else we're going to be doing, Pete? We
mentioned already that I've got my book on the Sudan, and I think the podcast from that will be just incredibly exciting, because the battle stories are just so wild and so different, from modern fighting. I mean, in 1882, they're in redcoats. And it's we'll try and be balanced. We'll be fair to the other side, because I think that's crucial to us in this modern day. One reason that we may be moving to seasons, as other podcasts are, which we haven't really discussed yet properly, but is that we want to do the Peninsular War, and that means research. And that means we've got the books, because we bought them when we bought the Waterloo books. But it will take more time, preparation time. That's not going to be something we can just bash off. Not that the normal episodes are. What else are we going to do? Was there anything else?
Well, I think we had occasionally we have departures. So, for example, we did Rickenbacker, which was a departure.
Should we sing the song?
No, because we've got quite a large American audience. It's sort of equal size to the UK in terms of the downloads. So maybe we'll do some
the
more
Aussies
stuff
don't like
for,
us, do they?
They heard the New Zealand accent and ran away. It's
Might be
great.
the accents.
So we might do some more for the Americans.
We'd like that.
Yeah, they would, and but so would we. You know, we visited Merzargon not too long ago, 3 or 4 years ago now. So maybe we could do something. But generally speaking, it's getting more and more difficult now to do something that's not the obvious. So we've just been to Eeps, for example, for 3 days, and we were full of grand ideas of what we might do while we were out there, and we didn't do anything in terms of the podcast. So we want to try and steer away from the obvious stuff, but do something for the listeners that perhaps we don't often cater for. So we've got 2 Russians, and I'd like to think one is Putin and the other one's his body double. So we might do something for him.
Well, I don't know what's on the horizon, but whatever it is, I know it's going to be great. And the podcast just goes from strength to strength. This has been great, guys. I always enjoy catching up, and we don't do it often enough. And this has been fantastic. I'm really looking forward to the future episodes. Congratulations on hitting 200, and I look forward to doing this again when you hit 400.
Oh,
hooray!
Well, thanks, guys. The podcast is Pete and Gary's Military History. I mean, I'm sure you're a fan if you're listening to this, but if you're watching this on YouTube, go and check the podcast out. It's absolutely fantastic. It's a fresh take on military history, and these 2 guys are worth listening to. Gentlemen, thank you for taking the time. Look forward to talking to you again soon.
Cheers.
Cheers,
Bye,
Matt.
lads. He's lovely, Dad.